Sign that we're live. We are live. Yeah. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock on the 4th of September 2024, and I'd like to welcome those members of the public and the press who are joining us today for this meeting of the Combined Authority Board. There are no fire drills scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting, follow the Democratic Services officers who can lead us to the assembly point. As a reminder to those present that the public session of this meeting will be live streamed and a recording will be placed on the Combined Authority's website. Can I also ask that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. As always, I do welcome and value the views of all board members during our debates. I do, though, reserve the right to exercise my discretion as chair during the course of the meeting to determine the time permitted for speeches and the number of speeches to be made by any member or officer in order to manage the meeting efficiently. And with that, I'm moving onwards to item 1, which is announcements. Just the free rein to really just say welcome back. I hope everybody's had a good summer break, time to rest, recuperate, enjoy some sunshine, and also to wish a bit like this feeling a bit like the new term, all those kids, particularly those who were born during the COVID pandemic, who are entering into the education system for the first time. I wish them all the very best, as well as all those returning to school who had maybe exam results and are looking forward to the new school year. With that, I'm going to move on to apologies for absence, and with this would be Alison, as the head of Democratic Services, let us know of any apologies.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got apologies today from Councillor Bridget Smith, and we have Councillor John Williams substituting, and apologies from Councillor Sarah Comboy, and we've got Councillor Sam Wakeford substituting. Thank you.
I also note that, Al, you kindly advised us that you had a need to maybe leave by midday. We'll obviously get through the meeting as we do need to, but thank you for that, giving us that early warning in that. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any items being considered today? And as always, those declarations of interest, if there aren't any, can be made at any point during the meeting. Item 4 is an update on Combined Authority Board and Committee memberships. The report asks us to note various changes that have been made to members and substitutes on committees and the board since our last meeting in July. Are there any additional updates since the publication of the papers, Alison?
Thank you, Mayor. No, there's no updates since publication.
Does anyone have any questions regarding these proposed changes? No indication of a question there, so we've been asked to note the changes, which we have done, and no vote is required. Moving on to the minutes of the last meeting on the 24th of July. Is the board happy to approve these minutes as an accurate record and to note the action log? So, Bowden.
Thank you, Mayor. On the action log, minute 4, I did ask in June about the revenue slippage, and I asked the question whether this was systemic and whether it was particular to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, or whether it was something which was experienced right across the country. And we are told that work is still underway on this. May I ask when the future meeting is, when this will be reported to? And the reason I ask is that as we move towards the budget setting process for 25-26, I think it's really helpful to have this information at our fingertips. So is it possible that information could be made available at the next meeting, please, Mayor?
I'm going to, Janice, is that a question that maybe you could offer up a response to, maybe come to the, I'll ask Director Feynman.
That one? Yes. Yes, certainly we can get some information, and if it's helpful, we can distribute that in between the board meetings, so that at least you've got sight of the information, and then we can have that ready for the board.
So it's within the next board meeting is planned for end of October. Okay. Thank you. no other comments or hands raised, so I see no objections. So we will take the minutes as approved and the action log as noted with the additional point made and confirmed from the Director of Finance. Item 6 is for petitions. As we received no petitions, we'll move on to item 7, which would be public questions. And as we've also received no public questions for this meeting, that means we can now go on to item 8, forward plan. Are there any questions or comments on the item 8, which is the forward plan? Oh, all right. Okay. Well, we have to vote on this one. Those in favour of the forward plan as stated in item 8 and presented? Those against? Those abstaining? So it's passed a majority. So item 9 are the Combined Authority Monthly Highlights Report as presented by Rob Bridge, our Chief Executive, who will now introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning to everyone. Feels good to be back in this chamber. Councillor Bowden, spent many a year in here. I'm not going to go through the report in too much detail. I thought a couple of things would be important to just to focus on. So first of all, important week, we have the new building at ARU Peterborough that was handed over and will be going live, the new lab. If you haven't had a chance, I think it'd be good to try and get an opportunity for board and other members to see it. Obviously really, really good in terms of STEM opportunities, and again an upskilling opportunity around this area and wider, but it's been a really good on budget and on time project, which I think is important, coming back maybe to Councillor Bowden's point around underspends and programme management. So I thought I would just say I think that's a really good, but a big thanks to Peterborough City Council and ARU Peterborough colleagues as well as those in CPCA. Obviously I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but we have the bus franchising consultation that now is live. A number of the public events will be starting in the coming weeks. We are getting, good responses, and what I mean by that, I mean numbers. I'm not going to say what the views are in those responses, but I think my ask, as has been to chief execs and other colleagues, you helping putting the message out so that we get as rich a consultation response to this is really, really important. The Tiger card continues to be incredibly successful. It's successful in terms of how many cards we have. We'll see in the budget monitoring report that at the moment that the cost actually isn't as high as we expected, but that's partly to do with £2 fare and that differentiation. But again, it's been really well received across the region. And then the final thing I was going to touch on, subject to questions, is just local growth plans in terms of what I think is important just to touch on here. As you know, board, there's been a lot of work since the general election with all mayoral combined authorities to start to develop 10-year local growth plans. And there's been a lot of work in recent weeks with your constituent, your council colleagues, your officers, your chief execs, your directors, to really develop the first stage of that with our government colleagues, and that is around recognising strengths, barriers, challenges to start to feed into national industrial strategy, which the Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister are very clear they wanted areas to feed into, but then to actually work through into October and spring budget, and looking for that wider growth plan to be approved at some point next year. And that's still quite fluid. There's still some fluidity about timings, but obviously we have a workshop this week with government colleagues to start to work through what they will see as areas of strengths and barriers that may feed into the national industrial strategy. So I suppose a big thank you to all of you and your teams, because it's been quick turnaround. It's needed a lot of support and help across all councils with quite tight timescales. And I would say that the feedback that we've had through MHCLG and the officer who's working with us is that the MHCLG colleagues have been very impressed with what we have provided so far and how we have approached it. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more around some of that detail later on. So I'll probably pause there and allow members to ask me anything.
you've been kept busy basically over the summer, of course. Okay, any first hand raised from you, Councillor Bowden?
Thank you very much indeed. I think this is the only opportunity in the public session of this meeting for me to raise the issue. So I'm taking the opportunity to do so now. And it is to do with the comments about the local growth plan, which is in its early stages, it has to be said. And I do recognise that there will be iterative changes as we go through the forthcoming months. But there is, and I've raised it at the previous meeting, a challenge that we've got, which still hasn't been addressed as far as I'm concerned. And it's not my challenge. In fact, it's a challenge which goes back to the Spear report, Rob, which you'll well remember. And in the Spear report, it stated that if we are to achieve the best growth that we can in the combined authority region, then the quickest growth that we can achieve is in the areas which already are the ones which are best developed, where there is the least deprivation, and that any policy which tries to maximize growth, especially in terms of time in the combined authority area, will increase the amount of inequality which there is within the combined authority area on a geographical basis. Now, that challenge was made out quite clearly in the Spear report, as you'll remember, and I have mentioned it once or twice in previous meetings over the last few years, and I am yet to understand what the combined authority's attitude will be in this local growth plan towards that dichotomy that we've got. Should we be trying to maximise growth? In fact, the combined authority's remit was originally to maximise growth. Should we be trying to maximise growth in absolute terms across the area, or should we be trying to reduce the geographical inequalities which exist within the area? And it's not a case of saying we can do both. We can't. We have to make a choice about where we prioritise. And I haven't yet understood whether that dichotomy, that decision, has yet really been made.
Do you want to make?
Councillor Bowden, obviously that is one of the challenges, but not just for this combined authority. It will be a challenge that every combined authority, for different reasons, each combined authority will have different makeups, will have different challenges, have different deprivation. We'll be having to make some decisions about where investment or opportunity barriers are. And I don't think we're quite at that point across the country in terms of the local growth plan development yet. The work that we've been doing has been very much focusing in on our strengths. Now, I recognise that if you're then focusing on your strengths, in many ways you play into that point you've made about the Spear, but at the same time, how we can try our best to get to a more inclusive way across the whole of the region, and the documents we provided, building on what we did for UK Reef, talk about, the importance of our two fast growth cities, but also what we can do across the area. And I think when we meet with MHCLG colleagues this week for this first discussion, co-production is the words they're using, we need to understand what the government angle is on that. But no formal decisions as a board around a local growth plan are expected at this stage. And there's time to shape that, to try our best, and I use the word try our best, to address some of those concerns, some of those issues. But it won't be an easy one, because at the same time, we do need to make sure that we feed our area into the national industrial strategy so that we all can see the thread that goes to the national position. We also need to recognise that, and you will have seen, slightly different approach, but there is still interest from government around Cambridge, Greater Cambridge area. The Minister wrote, you probably saw last week, and that's probably to be expected, but I think be done in a different way. But I think there's a real opportunity around this table and through the coming weeks and months as this gets developed to do our best, you do your best as the elected officials to make decisions that hopefully can address as much of those things as possible, but maximise mostly for the area, which is what we want to do.
We're going to take some more questions. Lucy, Councillor Messinger.
Thank you. I'm going to start by saying that I profoundly disagree with Councillor Bowden on the idea that there has to be a definite choice between maximising growth for the area and reducing inequality. I don't think that those things are in conflict. I think there may be some occasions when they're in conflict, but I think there are a very large number of other occasions when actually the thing that is helpful for growth also can help with reducing inequalities. And actually an awful lot of the work that happens on the Skills Committee, for example, is both about upskilling our resident population, which is profoundly important for growth and for tackling inequality. And I think there are a very large number of projects that the Combined Authority is and has been involved in, and I'm sure will be in the future, which are beneficial for both of those things. Now, on occasion, you may have to choose one project over another in terms of what is going to be helpful for maximum growth or reducing inequality. But I don't think that that is a regular thing to have to do. I think that an awful lot of the time those things align quite helpfully. So I just wanted to say that I don't necessarily agree with Councillor Bowden that there is routinely a choice to be made. The thing I wanted to ask for a little bit more information from Rob about, which actually feeds into that whole conversation, was about the visit from the National Infrastructure Committee and the topics that they discussed. And you mentioned here that quite a lot of that was about, on this occasion, was about the electricity distribution infrastructure, which is clearly a really important issue for us and in lots of other parts of the country. But I know that that's been a real constraint here. I just wanted a little bit of reassurance that there were other things that were also discussed, some of which are our major transport projects. And I wanted to check whether the Ely area capacity enhancements had been discussed on that occasion. I'm hoping they were. Thank you.
Over to you, Rob.
So yes, I mean, the main thrust of conversation was actually energy, water as well came up, as you would expect, but there was the wider constraints on all growth, and actually more of a conversation about, and this is key to all of you as council leaders, the timing of infrastructure. So, you know, build the houses, infrastructure follows, not being the right answer, getting the infrastructure lined up early on various different things. And the power one is a very interesting one, as you all know, that usually that's triggered, the power increases on housing developments are triggered at different points, and then who's the person who picks up that, and etc. So there was that discussion, but this was the third or fourth visit of the National Infrastructure Commission to the Cambridge area as part of their work they've been doing, and they listened very much to the wider issues that aren't just about electricity and transport. So we had some Greater Cambridge Partnership officials around the table. We also had Anglian Water around the table. So there was a different mix.
Actually, Sam indicated before. So, Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. As the Chief Exec has flagged, we don't have any decisions to make about the local growth plan today. So I don't think we need to discuss it at length, but I wish to share my reflection on the challenge Councillor Bowden posed as well. I think the two questions of equality and growth I'd see as challenges rather than inherent dichotomies, and rather like Councillor Nessinger, I certainly would challenge a pessimistic idea that it's impossible to tackle them, but I think it is absolutely critical that one bears those in mind. And in our district in Huntingdonshire, for example, some of our most exciting businesses providing opportunities for employment for young people are as a result of spin-outs and developments that's taken place in Cambridge and the academic sector. In due course, I have every confidence, given our location, that the same will be true of things coming out of Peterborough as well. And so, from my point of view, the challenge is a good one, but the suggestion that it's not possible to seek to target growth for the benefit of our residents more widely on an inclusive basis, I'd question. I am particularly pleased that the National Infrastructure Commission did include a discussion significantly focused on power, not least as our network challenges are core barriers to some of our important business growth aspirations in Huntingdonshire as well. But I think the reassurance around the breadth of infrastructure conversations are helpful.
I think you, Councillor Smith, Anna, you indicated you want to speak some.
Okay, well, like Councillor Nessinger, I challenge the assumption that growth and challenging inequality have to be at odds. For one thing, we've had 14 years of a tanking economy, and we need prosperity, national prosperity, to fund the investment in services that we desperately need to reduce inequalities. I think a growth plan allows us to ensure that the growth is done in a sustainable and equal way, because you can have growth that is simply growth at all costs and doesn't think about equalities, or you can have growth that thinks about making sure that that love is shared. So I think the growth plan allows us to do that. I think it's a good springboard for that. And I have to say, I'm particularly excited by some of the green tech opportunities. So the Combined Authority, for example, has put quite a lot of funding into Peterborough's Centre for Green Technology, and I think things like that are really powerful and really positive for the future. Now, obviously, as a Cambridge representative, you'd expect me to emphasise what Greater Cambridge can bring to that. And that's not about saying Cambridge wants it all. It's about how Cambridge can share that. I think we can do that. We can ensure that we have a growth plan where places of high economic growth can be a benefit to all of us. And it was interesting that Councillor Wakeford mentioned some of the companies in his area, because I was actually going to do it exactly the same thing, where you have Cambridge University startups now growing in Hunts and providing a lot of local jobs. I think one of the challenges, we've got a wonderful, diverse economy in our Combined Authority area. We've got the green jobs, we've got the agri-tech, we've got the innovation clusters. We should be able to harness that in a growth plan that brings prosperity and equality for our whole region. And I think that's a vision that we should be focusing on.
Does anybody else want to make any sort of final comments? Oh, sorry, in the way there. Sorry, and then you will open that. Thanks, Mayor. Listening to different perspectives there, in the spirit of harmony, I agree with all of you in different reasons. I've always felt, and I think from a business perspective, there's a natural persuasion to put the two things together in terms of economic growth and provision of appropriate skills, but we kind of have to separate them, because wherever there is economic growth in our region, we need to make sure that the whole population have the potential to acquire the skills and travel to those jobs. That's something that we can be proactive in. When it comes to economic growth, we can't sprinkle magic dust on a piece of land and make that an economic startup. What we can do is be receptive to one that exists and is desperate for support to expand rapidly. And that's where our sector strategies cover different areas that are not geographically weighted to one particular region. We have other strands, whether it's advanced manufacturing, agri-tech, that cover other spaces. So I absolutely agree that you can have both on your mind and as part of your strategy, but that doesn't prevent you proactively looking, when there are limited funds, on how you can prime the pump in some areas in advance of others, because you're looking at the broader socioeconomic factors. The one thing I would say is, and I think there's some great work on this, and as the team delicately keep reminding us, this is a work in progress in early stages. So we're all sharing an opinion now, but the things we're raising are all probably already on the drafting list. The thing for me is, as this evolves, is we're looking now at the moment rightly at the high level, the big projects that unlock either capacity in our system or some of the really, really high profile projects that can grow. As it evolves, we need to recognise that in the sense of the what's in it for me on a regional basis, there also needs to be a what's in it for me on an economic basis. So we need to make sure there's also focus on how we support the SME sector as well as the largest creators of jobs, because the economic growth plan has to be what can we do in the next 5 years, but also what can we do as a foundation for the next 20 years, and how some of those businesses will grow and be the bigger you. So I think it's absolutely these healthy conversations, but I do think it's moving in the right direction with some very valid kind of warning flags. Thank you, Al. Perhaps seems pertinent to return to yourself,
Councillor Bowden. Chris, you introduced this subject now. Maybe after you've spoken, I'll maybe summarise.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor, and thank you for allowing me to hang my hat on this particular item in this particular way. What I said was slightly misrepresented, and I did just repeat what the Spear report said, and that was that if we seek to maximise economic growth across the whole area, then that will result in a greater amount of inequality within the area geographically. Now, I'm not saying that we can't go for growth and also seek to reduce inequality. What I'm saying is that if our only goal was to maximise economic growth in the area, then, and common sense tells you this, but then the areas where it's easiest to have the growth will be the ones you'd go for, and those are the areas which are currently the least deprived. Now, I have to say many of the comments that Anna Smith made, I do agree with, and the point I was trying to get across is there will need to be a balance here. And the danger was always that if we were just to seek to maximise economic growth, then we would have the, I'll say, unintended consequence of increasing inequality. And I wanted to raise the issue now so that as we go through this process over the next few months, we can at all times have in mind the fact that we do need to get an appropriate balance here. Now, what the appropriate balance is a political decision to be made by us, and I fully accept that. I'm not going to try and say what that balance should be. But the subject, for example, of skills was raised, I thought, rather helpfully, both by Lucy and by Al. And on skills, as an example, we have a bias in our system in terms of the amount of money which is provided in skills towards the areas which have the greatest skills deprivation. That bias is absolutely tiny. It's a minuscule bias. And we have a situation, I'll speak about Finland in particular, in Finland, of an appalling skills, a lack of skills, not merely in children leaving school, but in adults as well. And if a very small bias in favour of more funding to Finland does not address the issue of the desperate skills failure that there is in Finland, not merely in comparison with the rest of the combined authority area, but compared with the whole of the rest of the country. It's quite scandalous that we are still in this position, and this is something where the combined authority has the opportunity to make a change and can do so as part of its growth plan. Because without skills in place, you're not going to be able to have the people to be able to drive the economic growth that we all want. So I'm very grateful to you, Mayor, for allowing me to hijack this particular item, but to raise this issue. And it is done not to try and get a resolution today, because we won't, but to try and make sure that this problem that we've got of economic inequality, geographical economic inequality not being made worse, is in our minds over the next few months as we move towards the growth plan.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I think it's time to move on. I don't think anybody else wants to speak. I'll just sort of, first of all, thank everybody. Well, first of all, Chris, for identifying this as an opportunity to talk about the 10-year growth plans. As you say, and has been alluded to, there's a lot of work going on in the background, but I think it's important in terms of a public domain and speaking at a public meeting for people to realise that this work that's been done at significant level over the summer, certainly within our own organisation and also in conjunction with officers across the constituent authorities, is actually a real focus for the whole of the country. Well, it certainly is within the combined authority mayoral areas, and that was set down at a very early stage by the new government. Very rich conversation, challenge, but I think we're coming towards consensus, which, and certainly this idea of the tackling of inequality, it's music to my ears, as it always has been, as I've always made it clear that we need to tackle health inequality, educational, employment inequality. But just a few points I'll just highlight. You mentioned the Spear. I'm intrigued to know who's read the Spear more, me or you, Chris. It was a very wise person told me before I was elected, make sure you read the Spear report, because there was a fear that maybe at the time people hadn't really taken on board. It is an excellent document. I think on that we agree. And I do go back to it on a regular basis, but it's now flawed, simply on the grounds that it was pre-Brexit, pre-COVID, pre-Ukrainian war, and pre-economic crisis. And I think the world has changed, and indeed has changed to some extent politically as well. But let's be optimistic here. the work that is also going alongside of the constituent authorities around our shared ambition. We haven't actually mentioned, everybody said there, but it's still a work in progress, the state of the region. All of that will hopefully, in terms of consensus and bringing us together as a board, speaking as one for the whole of the communities of the Cambridge and Peterborough area, will give us a local growth plan that really does, takes light of the fact that you've asked it to do. Inequalities within our organisation, we no longer just have a very short kind of measurement of success, be it number of houses, GVA. It's all about other things, which we've talked about at length. So we demonstrated we could do it when we were at UK Reef earlier in the year. We've got an opportunity. I'd say it's a chance for us to really grab them by the bull by the horns, and hopefully with that balance of everybody feeding in, this conversation we've just had is a good example of where we can achieve consensus and all the benefits for the local community. So on that, nobody else has wanted to challenge me on that those words, so I'm going to move on. We were asked to note the report. Thank you for bringing all the good news in terms of highlights, Rob, and no vote is required, so we move on. That moves us on to the improvement plan. Angela Probert, who is the interim director of the transformation programme, will now introduce this report. We'll hear the report, go for a few questions, and then take it from there.
Thank you. The report has three elements to it. The first is that the best value notice that was issued in January of this year has now lapsed, and that the combined authority is waiting for a letter from the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government regarding whether a further best value notice will be issued or not. The report sets out the progress that's been made on the activity that is set out in the improvement plan through the months of June and July. And Mayor, I'm able to share that progress continues to be made across the improvement plan. It's on track and rated green. And in paragraphs 2.2 to 2.5 of the report, there's detail of that progress, and the highlight report, which is appended as Appendix 1, sets out full detail. The last element set out in the report is the outcome of the internal audit review that was undertaken in June of this year on embedding continuous change. And that gave the highest level of assurance, that being substantial assurance. The details are set out in paragraph 2.5. But Mayor, I think that is a key internal audit report, particularly on how going forward the combined authority will deal with matters relating to things it needs to focus on. Mayor, I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Many thanks, Angela. I have a first question from Councillor Bowden. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. You may think that I have a very limited social life if some part of it is taken up by having quite lively discussions with other elected councillors around the county about the best value notice. But that is what has happened over the last few weeks, in that I've taken a certain position and others have taken a different position. My understanding was as follows, and this is certainly what happened with the first best value notice, which was we had for 12 months, and before the end of that best value notice period, further 6-month best value notice was given. Now, my understanding, Mayor, was that the best value notice was for a period of 6 months, ending the 31st of July 2024, and that it is now lapsed. It was really simple and straightforward. However, I have heard from others, and to some extent it's mentioned in here as well, that we await a decision and a letter from government about whether or not there will be a new best value notice. Now, if my understanding was, if it lapsed, then that's it, it is finished. They'd have to start again afresh. And because no letter was issued before the 31st of July, that is, or should be, the end of it. Now, ultimately, how long do we wait? before we know whether we still have a best value notice or not. This question is asked not because I know the answer, but because I'm honestly puzzled about whether or not we're out of the best value notice period, which is what I believe, or we are potentially still within it, and if so, for how long?
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
I'll begin as and Councillor Bowden, it's a very important question, and you probably can expect it's been exercising me over the last few weeks as well in terms of liaising with MHCLG colleagues. So what I can tell you is I received on the day of the lapsing a nice short note that said, we know it lapses today and we will be in touch with the new minister. And I don't mean that, but ultimately, with everything that was going on, but that was the end of July, the new government had been in place 3 weeks, and I've had further correspondence, and I hope that, and I'll use the word next steps rather than will we have a new notice, that we hear something at the beginning of next week. We had hoped to have heard before today's meeting, so that's why. In reality, yes, there is not a best value notice in place because the date lapsed, but I do have something that sort of says, don't say it's gone, don't say it's extended, because they need to confirm to us what the next step is. So as soon as we get that, you will all be told, I can assure you, and we're all ready to do that.
I think it was Councillor Williams got in before you, Councillor Singer. Do you want to come, John?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Having been a local authority that has experience of a best value notice, which lapsed, and then we got a new one. We had the same situation where our first best value notice lapsed, and no one could tell us what was next going to happen. And then, but we were told that we would be hearing from the minister, and it took about a fortnight for the minister to then say, no, they're going to give us another best value notice. So because it lapses, it doesn't mean to say that it's gone away. I have to say, obviously, circumstances now changed, and we've got a different government, we've got a new Secretary of State, a different minister. So we're hoping, because we have a best value notice that's about to come up to expire, that it will actually expire and we can get on with doing our job.
Thanks for the insights too. Councillor Lucy.
Thank you. My question is really also on the topic of the best value notice, but more related to the getting on with doing our job. And I think that there was a situation where some of the progress and some of the things that the authority was planning for were potentially we were not able to plan for in quite the same way as other mayoral combined authorities because we had a best value notice. The impression I have been given by the work that's been going on over the summer is that at present we are being treated by the government in exactly the same way as every other mayoral combined authority, in which kind of feels as if that's a useful position to be in. Could you just confirm that that's the case?
Well, from a leader politician's point of view, I feel very much included in all the conversations that have been put forward by Angela Rayner, the Prime Minister, and that's obviously included all combined authorities. We feel very much. So I think it's fair to say that because they were classed as trailblazers, Greater Manchester and West Midlands, sort of a little bit further on, but everybody else, from a leadership point of view, very much we're all in the same boat, and we're encouraged to think like that. I'll pass over to Officer.
So yes, Councillor Singer, we have been completely involved in everything that all of the mayoral combined authorities have been involved in, including in the policy shaping and working groups to devolution bills, further devolution opportunities, single settlements, spending reviews, and there hasn't been, Cambridge Peterborough are not able to take part of the conversation. I think, as we know, when the best value notice was in place before and the devolution framework was there, it was very clear that you couldn't access or have the same engagement. That's not been the case. I think what I'd say to all members around the table, the conversations with officials are positive, but it needs the minister to confirm what that means. And that's probably as much as I can say at this stage. As I say, I would have hoped to have said more, but we are stuck with needing the formal confirmation of things.
But in terms of our actual work, waiting for that confirmation is not making any difference to the pace or the engagement that we're getting. Thank you.
You've got Anna and then Sam.
Thank you. So first of all, as ever, thank you for the work that's going on in this improvement piece. It has quite rightly been a significant part of the work we've all been doing for the last couple of years. Obviously, the issues raised go back a lot longer than that, and it's really encouraging to see the progress that's being made and the way that that's being tracked across. And thank you, not just to yourself, but to everybody who's working with you to do that. I did just want to mention a little bit around, I know we're not formally discussing the shared ambition piece today, so I don't want to really focus too much on that, but just to raise a couple of issues. First of all, it's been an incredibly intense process in a good way, lots of opportunities for engagement. I'm particularly pleased to see the way that it's not just been ourselves as board members, but it's been members across our councils who have been invited to be part of these conversations. And I know that has been significantly appreciated. I think at the moment, I'd still like to see us reflecting our region more in that ambition statement. There's a bit of a sense, and this is always the case, I think, as we write things jointly, that everything becomes things we can agree on, which could almost be said anywhere. Are we okay? Do I need to stop? No, we're fine. Which could almost be said for any area across the country. And I think that challenge still remains for us, really articulating, if you like, the USPs of our region as we go through that. So I'm looking forward to seeing the next draft and to see how that is reflected. But I know a huge amount of work has gone into that and a lot of opportunities for us all to contribute so far. So thank you.
No more comments. We have been asked to note this, which we have done, and no note is required, so we will be able to move on. But before Angela leaves, for those of you who may not be aware, this is Angela's last board meeting before she leaves us. And I couldn't let this particular opportunity pass without saying a few words. You, Angela, have been integral to the successful delivery of the improvement plan put in place to address the best value challenges faced by us all here at the authority. You have reported back on progress to this board very professionally, quietly, calmly, and in conjunction with the improvement board and the government. You've always listened to our feedback and requirements and ensured that they are translated into clear action and have been followed up on. Through your excellent work carried out with diligence, commitment, consideration, and collaboration, we are now very much in a much better position and have embedded processes, procedures, and ways of working in place which provide a strong foundation for the opportunities which lie ahead. And there are many. So, sorry if it sounds a bit dry as I read it off here. I'd love to say it spontaneously, but I don't want to miss off the important bits. I'd like to say a personal, huge, big thank you from me personally, from the board, your colleagues at the CA, and from me. I can't say thank you enough and wish you all the greatest success in the future. Thank you. Going forward, the improvement work will be led by Janice, our Executive Director for Resources. And if maybe you can now, for the final time, stand down with our greatest thanks and just allow Janice to maybe come up and say a few words. And Anna, do you particularly want to say something?
Yeah, Nick, if I could just add my thanks as well, because when I had to come in and cover, we were right at the heart of that improvement work. And Angela, you were brilliant in supporting us all and getting me up to speed incredibly quickly. And I know how hard you worked on that whole process. So I wanted to add my personal thanks as well to that.
Okay, Janice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Angela, as well. You've been a massive support to me in starting the new authority and allowing me to get into to grips with this with the improvement plan. So what we're now looking at, hopefully, and that'll be subject to the ministerial letter, is about the steps that we need to take post the best value notice. So some of the main areas that we've started to look at in consideration of this, and obviously we'll bring back more details to the board in the future, is thinking about how we reflect and learn from what took place within the improvement programme, and that we formally closed down the phase 3 of that, and ensuring that our activity continues to progress, and that we move to directorate business plans, part of business as usual now for us as an authority. Recognising that better never stops is more than just a strap line, I think, for the combined authority as well and for the region, and that we can look to how we focus on future transformation and change improvements. And again, that works with, as you mentioned, just about shared ambition and the priorities for the region. And then how we review these policies and procedures that we have set up as part of the clear governance approach that was built into the improvement work. And how we test those as well, through whether that's through surveys, through audits, or other external reviews. So we've been thinking about all of those things, and then how can we share learning both from ourselves and the processes and what we've learned, whether that's the signal assurance framework and other new things that we've put in as a combined authority, but also as well continuing to learn from other combined authorities as well about the good practice that we see across there. And then, we'll need to think as well about the role of the improvement board and what will mean going forward and our relationships there. So that was just to give a heads up really about some of the thinking that we've been trying to consider as we hopefully move out our best value. But again, some of that detail will be subject to what we see in the ministerial letter back in due course. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janice. I can't see anybody indicating the need to question. Good luck. Thank you, Janice. I can see that we are joined by Aidan van der Weyer, who is the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And this is item 11. Thank you for joining us, Aidan. You're here to introduce the report because unfortunately you were unavailable at our last board meeting. So I'm very grateful that you can make the time on this occasion. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Apologies for not being able to come last time. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I believe, has a key role in the governance arrangements of the combined authority, in particular, constructively holding the Mayor and combined authority account for its decisions, strategies, policies. The chair for the last municipal year was Charlotte Kane, but unfortunately she's been whisked off to another place and is unable to present the report. As the report sets out, a major focus of the committee was the ongoing work on the improvement plan, which featured at most meetings. We also looked at the budgets of the authority, discussed in some detail support for bus services that the authority is involved in, both short-term and the longer-term plans. In the coming year, we will continue to look at elements of the improvement plan, as you've just been discussing. We obviously look forward to welcoming members of the combined authority and yourself, Mayor, to our meetings. Notably, next week we're hosting the public mayoral question time. And there is also the potential for looking at proposals for greater devolution of powers to the Mayor and the combined authority. As I said, we have, I believe, as a committee, and will continue to contribute significantly to the furthering the work of the Mayor and the combined authority. Of course, we could not have performed our role without the outstanding support provided by the governance manager, other committee staff, monitoring officer, and I would also really like to thank all the staff of the combined authority who've given up their time to come and speak to us and, of course, answer our questions. Thank you very much.
Nice to see you, Aidan, and pass on our regards to not Councillor Kane, Charlotte Kane, MP. Are there any questions or comments on the report? Aidan, having come here. There are no questions, Aidan. So it sounds like I'll be catching up with you next week at question time, and the process of overview and scrutiny will continue then. But thank you to yourself as taking on the new chair role. Thank you to the committee, and see you next week.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
No vote was required, so we can move on to the item of budget monitor update. This is where, Janice, you get to return to the hot seat as Executive Director for Resources and to introduce the report. Many thanks.
And thank you, Chair. So I'm here today to introduce the budget monitoring report for the first quarter of 24-25. The report sets out the financial position based on the spend and activities at the end of June. Obviously, recognising this is still very early in the financial year and that forecasts probably reflect that, with a number of them coming in on budget, and obviously we'll work to refine that as the year progresses. So that said, generally the spend is on track across the majority of budget lines, so with no material variations in areas such as the corporate areas and economy of growth. However, I think we do need to point out there are two areas where there are more significant variations on spend to date. Namely, these are in two areas within place and connectivity, the Net Zero Hub and passenger transfer. In terms of revenue for the Net Zero Hub, this is expected to even out across the year in its core budget and local energy advice demonstrating the public sector decarbonisation programme. However, there is £4.3 million underspend on the Hub 2 programme, and this is linked to a wider underspend that you'll see when looking at the capital expenditure report as well. And both of these are set out in Appendix 3 to this report to provide a little more detail on them. The position on the Hub 2 has previously been reported to board and relates predominantly to a delay in 23-24, and also some of the submission of housing lots and their approval being slower than expected, although a revised delivery profile has now been agreed with DESNZ. And just to point out and to confirm that that programme is fully funded from grant. Within passenger transport, there are three main areas of variance that you can see within the report. That's supported bus services, concessionary fares, and the reduced fares for people under 25. It's also known as the Tiger Passes. So for the supported bus services and the Tiger Pass, there is an issue there of timing. So the budget assumed a full year would be spent, whereas some of the arrangements for these have taken place partway through the year. So bus services, for instance, is going out in 3 tranches. The first tranche has gone out, but the remaining 2 are scheduled to go out in September this month. For the Tiger Pass, there is nil spend showing at the moment, but the passes were launched in late May, and at the time of writing this report, the first invoices are only due from July. There's also concessionary fares. DfT did announce a new arrangements for this post-COVID in terms of the funding models. These were expected to show an increase in costs, and I think this was something that most combined authorities had assumed, but these have yet to materialise. So we are keeping a watching brief on that one, as we are with all the others across the year. For capital, there are 4 areas that are indicating to-date variances, but with the assumption that they will be fully utilised by the year end. That's Market Towns, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, digital connectivity, and again, as mentioned earlier, the Hub 2 programme. With the Hub 2 programme, there will be a request to adjust the budget for that to recognise now the change and the true delivery for that going forward. For income, again, the material variation on that one, variance on that is to do with the Hub 2 programme, so that is matched by the spend position on that. And we'll also be looking, as I say, to reprofile that budget. There is a £2.5 million favourable movement on Treasury management due to the interest rates. being higher than assumed within the budget, and that has already reflected in the outturn as a £2.5 million expected underspend there. And finally, in section 6, it does set out a position on the thematic funds and notes at this stage an allocation of £650,000 in relation to chief executive approvals under the delegations that this board provided as part of the SAF process, and they're set out in section 7. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janice. First question to panel.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Nice and clear as always. I wanted to ask about within the net zero context, the Hub 2, and I'm mindful it is a little bit of an entity within itself in the sense of its in and out funding that's ring fenced and what we can deploy. However, I guess as challenge, we've been through a number of iterations that have involved part of the net zero delivery program that have all had barriers to meeting our ambitions, whether it's capacity in the system for fitting or whether it's the current housing stock or where we are in the thing. And so my question is, do we set our budgets based on practical, realistic judgments, or do we set our budgets on initially the most that's potentially available for our region and then work backwards during the year once we've identified capacity?
Okay. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a bit of a cold, so apologies if my throat doesn't hold up. Regarding your question, Al, on the way the budget is set, first of all, so there's two aspects that are really important to your question. So firstly, the money that comes to the Greater South East Net Zero Hub is DESNZ money, and they award it based on kind of allocation model. So we kind of receive what we receive in those terms. Obviously there is some bidding and some of it is also subject to performance. So in one of their other funding streams, due to good performance, they then received additional funds, which we reported, I believe, at the last board meeting. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, although it seems unusual and the Greater South East Net Zero Hub is hosted by obviously ourselves as the combined authority, the delivery of Hub 2 isn't actually in Cambridge and Peterborough area, because Peterborough sources its Hub 2 delivery through another partnership with other unitary authorities, and in Cambridgeshire it's delivered through a partnership led by the City Council. So the delivery of Hub 2 and the budget that we're actually talking about is in the wider southeast area, but not actually within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So it is a kind of strange thing to be aware of in terms of understanding what's happening. I attended the Greater South East Net Zero Hub board yesterday as the senior responsible officer, and therefore had an update on the delivery. So as we said last year, they were running behind, and that's partly because it is typical in a capital programme of this size, particularly with, as you say, the barriers in the supply chain and the procurement to get up to running. That has now got in place and has picked up. So the figures that I was given yesterday is that there's 380 homes completed. They have a very large number that are in what they call a batch approval and ready to go, so that they will be able, they're on target, and I did challenge them on this, to be able to achieve 930 by the end of this quarter. They do continue to have a large number for the next batch to go through and get approved, and they're currently forecasting that they will have achieved 1,640 homes by the end of the financial year. That would then, they get paid per home, so that will then mean they bring the capital in line with the targets. Now clearly they have bi-monthly board meetings, which I attend and will continue to check and challenge, and our finance team working with, obviously overseen by Janice, is continuing to work very hard on them. But we're looking at both the delivery of the individual procured suppliers and also the marketing. The marketing is particularly important at the moment because the programme ends in March 2025, they have to maximise the number they get through now in order to be able to achieve the targets by March 2025. So marketing at the moment has been an absolute focus over the summer, and that has seen a real uptick in the number of projects that are coming forward. Now, obviously, there is a dropout because obviously people then decide they don't want the work being done in their house, etc., etc. And there are challenges with the way that the government grant scheme works, and we can't, we have to recognise that. But they are absolutely doing their utmost and forecasting that with the huge marketing effort, the work that they've now got with so many contractors in place, that they are on target. But I will continue to work very closely with the Greater South East Hub to ensure that that continues, and indeed report if there's further risks that we need to bring here.
Are you happy with that? No further comment.
I'm officially happy with that. In fact, I'm more than happy with that. I thought that was an excellent response and details, I think.
Okay. Take that. Councillor Murphy, sorry.
Thank you. I was going to ask a similar question. I guess I have a sort of follow-on question from that. It's really helpful to have the explanation. It's not at all obvious from what's written there that there is that explanation. I would come back to the point, please, that if we, because this is rolled over from the previous year, so it is a sort of an ongoing situation, that if we state in a budget that this is the plan, a budget is a costed plan and this is the plan, then it would be prudent, I think, to, it's difficult showing understands. It would be prudent to reflect in the budget what we realistically thought was going to be, spent. And then the second point really is a question about what our role is in ensuring delivery, because in a sense we're accountable to a degree because it's in our books, but this is quite a devolved process and complex process. And, what is our role in ensuring that delivery happens? And I would like to think that we did have a role in, that's what our accountability is, that's what we bring to bear. But it's not totally clear to me that we have power in this relationship. That to what levers can we pull is the sort of question, I guess.
Judith, over to you.
What I might do, if I may, is answer the second part of your question and perhaps ask Janice to talk about the actual how the budget's presented. In terms of the relationship that we have with the Greater South East Net Zero Hub, we have a set of agreements with DESNZ, and we are the accountable body. So we hold the grants come into us, and we have the agreements in place with DESNZ. I mean, I have to, for instance, confirm the monitoring information, and we have oversight as well. So when the hub wish to procure, wish to make payments, wish to commit to projects, either I have delegated authority to do that, and then that has to be reported through the ESC committee and here, or if it isn't within my delegated authority, then it would have to come here to the board. So we either report or we request permission. So that's how it works. So those agreements are in place. And indeed, it's worth saying that the hub staff are employees of CPCA. So it's not perhaps that kind of accountable body agreement that can be in place where they are part of a separate organisation that their accounts are overseen. The individuals at the Greater South East Energy Hub are employed by CPCA, and are therefore they have to follow, and in line with that, they then have to follow our procurement procedures, our financial procedures, and they indeed have a designated person within Janice's team who oversees their budget, and then that individual is overseen by colleagues within Janice's team. So I believe we do have the levers. But I also agree that there is probably work that needs to be done to clarify all of those relationships going forward to make it simpler and more transparent.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in relation to the finances, as mentioned earlier, it is a ring-fence grant, and I think we've reported previously about the underspend from 23-24 that was rolled over. So that was rolled over into the new year alongside the allocation on the basis that Judith was referring to earlier. And during the time between the budget setting and now, work has been ongoing with DESNZ to agree what the delivery profile should look like, which Judith referenced there. Seeking to do now is adjust the budget to reflect that delivery profile, because as you say, it looks a bit silly each time we come reporting such a significant level of variation, and it skews everything else and perhaps directs things to this, when in fact it's something that is actually completely ring-fenced through a grant and needs to better reflect what we think the delivery is going to be as agreed with DESNZ.
Thank you both. That's very helpful. Any other further questions in regard to the budget monitor update? Sorry, Dennis.
Sorry, Nick, it's not a question, it's just a comment, which is when it's a great report, because when the explanations come in, they're very clear. And I think that helps enormously and cuts down the time we need to ask. So thank you for that, because, you know, when you're reading at pace, when you see something that is clear, it's very helpful. So thank you.
Okay. I think on this one, as I say, this was one for noting, which we have done and discussed. Thank you for the queries, and thank you, officers, for both the succinct and helpful responses. No vote is required, so we will now move on to item 13, which allows possibly you to sit down if you want, Judith. But Janice, you're actually presenting the medium-term financial plan, the corporate plan process. Let's move on.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the proposed process to support the setting of the 25-26 budget and forecast medium-term financial plan. It also outlines the plans for the corporate strategy refresh, to which obviously the NTFP will be aligned. So in terms of timelines and processes, the plan is very similar to last year. However, the report does note that there are a couple of things that will potentially have an impact on that going forward. As you'll be aware, we now have a new government in place, and there are announcements to still follow, and a budget coming on the 30th of October. So we'll be keen to understand what's coming out of some of that may have potential impact on what the medium-term financial plan will say. So we need to look at that and the timing of those. But one of the most significant ones that's particular to this area is obviously the bus reform proposals and what they will mean going forward and how they will fit into the budget process. At the moment, with the draft report for the budget is produced, we obviously won't have the consultation responses back for the bus reform proposals, and therefore it is proposed that the budget does set out what the financial implications will be, but sets these out separately in order that board members are able to consider those financial implications, and that the combined authority has the resources in order to be able to address that should bus franchising go forward. And that too may be the same position that we get to when it is the final report, depending on the speed of which the consultation responses can be put together and a decision made. So that's just to bear that in mind, I think, as part of some of the issues impacting on the budget setting for this year. The other area that we will be looking at is the capital budget, as well as part of working through this. As members are aware, this was over-programmed last year, and as such, outside the thematic funds, where there is still decisions to be made, resources are committed for the longer term. However, it's recognised that other priorities may come to the fore. We're talking about projects that are coming forward via the investment committee as part of the single assurance framework, and also what may come out of shared ambitions work and other such things. So we do need to think as well about how the capital programme looks, where the priorities are, and also critically as well how it's profiled to make sure that it's a realistic delivery, and that will be done in consultations obviously with our constituent councils. And a significant change this year, though, in the process, just to point out, and it was handy having the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny here as well is the fact that the scrutiny has been increased for this year. So we're now doing a two-phase process. So phase one will consider the in-year position to enable scrutiny members to dig into that, looking how that aligns to performance indicators and the objectives for each of the major service areas. So there'll be 3 service areas that will go, which is place and connectivity, economy and growth, and then there will be a corporate core for all those main support services that are within the combined authority. So that will look at the in-year position, and therefore to see if there's any implications from the in-year position that may have a longer term impact on the NTFP. And then subject to the draft report being approved, the draft budget proposals being approved to go for consultation, the scrutiny committee will then look at the draft budget proposals in advance of the final proposals coming back in January to the board. This timetable also allows scrutiny, which is one thing they were keen on, to have a little bit more time to feed back into the board prior to them considering the budget proposals, to ensure that their views are taken into account as part of that thinking. With regard to the corporate strategy, just to say, throughout all of this, we will obviously be working closely with constituent councils, their chief execs and section 151s, as well as building up the budget report. With regard to the corporate strategy, that's probably more of a light touch as well, mainly because it's needed to reflect perhaps some of the impact that's coming out of growth, local growth plans, about the shared ambitions work, and it also needs to align to the budget report. So that will also be updated as we go through this process as well, but to reflect some of those more significant changes during the year. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Janice. Before we open the report to debate, I am going to move the recommendations from the chair. Do I have a seconder? I'll take Councillor Smith. So we're going to open now the report debate by the board. First hand up was Chris Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. We set dates for our Combined Authority Board meetings quite some time ago, but it's only recently that the Chancellor has announced the date of the budget, and the date of the budget is the 30th of October. But as I think we all know, what is actually said in the budget is very much has to be interpreted in the detail which is published in the couple of weeks after the budget itself. And I don't believe that the new government will be any different from the old government, because they're the same old civil servants who are responsible for it all. Given that, and given the potential impact that the budget may have on a whole host of areas, including local government, and I'm not expecting it to have a good impact, but we'll see. Given all of that, I'm just a bit concerned that our timetable is a bit awry, because on the 13th of November, we're meant to have a Combined Authority Board meeting to approve the draft budget for consultation. However, we won't know until, maybe not until then, some of the detail, important detail behind what's in the budget, which will affect our draft budget. And it certainly wouldn't allow the 7 days necessary to produce reports in time to put them before the meeting. So I wondered, Mayor, if there is a potential problem there, because I don't think I'm alone in thinking that the budget could have some very significant changes in it, maybe some plus and maybe some minus. Given that, maybe an idea, Mayor, for us to consider changing the date of our board meeting from the 13th of November, even putting it back by a week, may assist in making sure that there's enough time for officers to produce a report for us to consider before we approve the draft budget for consultation. Thank you, Mayor.
And the Chief Executive.
And Janice may want to come in as well. I mean, I think it's a fair point. We are leading into, will not necessarily be clear in terms of timings of announcements, which we've been used to, I think, in previous years. I think the difference for us as a mayoral combined authority, unless there's a complete change of approach in this fiscal event in October, which I doubt, is how we're funded, which is slightly different to that for you as local authorities, which if I was a local authority, 151 officer and chief exec, I would be pushing the day out as long as possible, because I would be thinking I don't know what the funding streams are going to be. But for us, you know, a lot of our funding streams are wrapped up in our gain share of 20 million, which, unless they're going to do something miraculous around MCAs, I don't think certainly in this October budget is something that's going to be looked at. I do think they will look at the future about how MCAs are funded, but I don't think that's going to come at this point in time. So the only things that could come as a problem is if they make any significant decisions around capital projects that could lead into it. And I think, you know, I'm happy that, you know, somebody to what Janice says, we can have a look and see whether or not anyone can be available the week after. We know how easy it is to get everybody together for meetings. But I suppose I'm less concerned from an MCA point of view than I would be if I was a local authority.
Can I Janice come in as well, and then
Thank you, and thank you, Rob. Yes, absolutely. Both of us being Section 151s in a past life, certainly as a local authority, there is an amount of nervousness around that. I mean, generally MHCLG would issue a principles paper because they recognise that local authorities need greater certainty. I think the general view that we're hearing is they're not expecting significant changes for 25-26 because of the length of time it takes to implement these, but instead some of that more significant change will probably come in future years when they're looking towards more multi-year settlement basis and looking for significant change then. So we're not anticipating a lot of change, similar to Rob, but as Rob was saying, it might be in capital projects, and we'll also keep an eye on things such as the party conferences as well, where some of these announcements do come out. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think this should be more specific. I was more concerned, to be honest, about the capital budget rather than the revenue budget. I'm right in saying that, although no one can be certain. But it's on the capital side where either challenges will be faced by us in terms of decisions made by the Chancellor, or opportunities will arise as a result of the decisions of the Chancellor. And we're in no position to know what those are going to be. And even when the budget is read out on the 30th of October itself, even after that, we'll only be generally the wiser. We certainly won't be specifically the wiser. And that's the reason why, and I'm very happy for this to be taken away and considered by officers after this meeting. But that's why I just wonder whether putting that Combined Authority Board meeting back by an extra week or two may be of assistance in making sure that we're actually provided with the full and complete information that we need in order to make the decisions at the Combined Authority Board meeting on the draft budget going out for consultation. Thank you, Mayor.
thank you, Councillor Bowden. Obviously, both officers have offered a response, and as we say, I think we'll take this one a little bit away for further consideration. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, but I also did want to comment. I think I can absolutely see where Councillor Bowden's coming from. My concern would be the push at the other end, because what we're doing with that draft discussion is it absolutely is that. We're bringing up the draft ideas to give officers plenty of time to work those up, to look at them, to discuss them with constituent authorities, so that we are fully prepped and prepared for the January board meeting. And I'm a little concerned about shoving the November board meeting later to constrict that time. I think Councillor Bowden's looking confused. Have I got the run end of the stick, Councillor Bowden?
Sorry, unless I'm mistaken, what we agree in November is the draft budget to go out for consultation. So it's what we put out for consultation. If we put something in for consultation which is wrong because of what's happened in the budget, then that makes the whole process rather difficult.
I understand more clearly what you're saying now. I think I would still hold the point that if we're going to have an effective consultation process, we need to be ensured we don't squeeze that. So I'm sure officers will look at that, but that would be my concern about pushing it later at that point. I had a couple of questions. I think the ONS working groups are a really fantastic idea. What I can't see obviously on this, and I may have missed it and apologies, is a parallel process for the thematic committees to contribute ideas to that budget setting process. So it'd be good to know what the plans are to allow thematic committees to bring ideas through in their areas of expertise and interest. I was really pleased to hear you mention the involvement of constituent authorities, because that was going to be one of my questions. But I would like to know when. Particularly, I think it would be very helpful to have those initial consultations prior to that board meeting, whenever that ends up being at the end of this year, rather than once those papers are published, so that those discussions can be held they can be robust discussions with constituent authorities first before we come and have our equally, I'm sure, robust discussions in this board space. So it'd be good to have some answers on that.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor. Yes, in relation to thematic committees, during this month should be presented the current MTFP for discussion. So that will be going to the thematic committees this month, and by the end of October, thematic committees will be presented a recosted medium-term financial plan. So they'll be worked through this coming month and next month as part of that. And in terms of liaising with constituent councils, as of next week, got an initial meeting with the chief executives of the constituent councils to go through the process and some of the initial assumptions that we'll be looking at for the budget, and to have those discussions with the chief executives at that point, and then we will widen that out as well to include the section 151s as part of that discussion going forward. And I think that's something that has been done in previous years, and we intend to ensure that that is continued as well through this financial year.
Thanks for the clarifications, Janice. Lucy, Councillor Singer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this report. I think it's really important to say that the budget processes at this authority have been improving. I think every year since I've been a member of the board, they did need to improve very significantly, but they are still improving. There was quite a lengthy discussion at the investment committee last week that Alan, Sam and I were all involved in, about the way in which papers and ideas kind of move into the budget, in particular in relation to two concept papers that were being presented at that committee, and how they fit with the medium-term financial plan and how that fits with the way in which both thematic committees and constituent authorities feed into the budget process. I'm not surprised that that isn't here, because it was a discussion we had last week, but I think it is something that we need a little bit more clarity on at some point. But I do still think that our budget processes are gradually getting better every year, and the investment committee is definitely an important part of that. But I still think that we need a little bit more clarity on where those concept papers fit within this process, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an agreement that there would be more education opportunities for the process, not just for the investment committee, but obviously that could be made for all of us, wider opportunity. And I obviously appreciate we are going to be reviewing the investment concept papers. It may be we'll have another little bit of discussion. We'll dip our toe into these waters again for conversation. Any more comments about the medium-term financial plan and corporate plan process? Well, we've already moved the recommendation, seconded, and we've discussed the report. Thank you for everybody's contributions there. Very helpful. Again, thank you, Janice, for the responses. The recommendation B was to note, but we do need to take a vote on the recommendation A. Those in favour? Those against, and those abstaining. So we're going to take that as a majority. That's item. Moving on to item 14. Does anybody want to? Right? No. So move on. Okay. In that case, first time to introduce at the first board meeting is our Combined Authority Returning Officer, Matt Cumberbatch, Monitoring Officer. Oh, sorry, I'm getting the wrong way around. That's it, isn't it? All right. So item 4 is the appointment of a Combined Authority Returning Officer, and it is your turn, Matt, as Director of Legal and Governance and Monitoring Officers, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know that I'm going to be brief. This is a report to seek the appointment, in fact, the reappointment of John Hill, the Chief Executive of East Cambridge District Council, as returning officer for the mayoral elections in May 2025. Members will be aware that even though we're talking about a May election, preparations need to start way in advance, which is why the report is put now. By law, of course, there must be a returning officer for these elections. There must be either an officer in this authority or one of the constituent authorities. there's cabinet officer advice, and there are some background papers which make reference to electoral commission advice for an experienced candidate for appointment. John Hill has that experience, and also with a view to working with the local chief executives in terms of the actual election process across the region. Just for sake of clarity, I understand that John Hill does know that he's being proposed as the returning officer. This is not going to be a great surprise to him when the decision is made either way as you choose. So that's the report, Chair.
I am opening the report for debate by the board. Anna, Councillor Bailey.
Just briefly to say, John Hill's an excellent returning officer. I think sometimes it could be taken that it means you're the oldest in the area, but actually in this case, I don't think that's necessarily true. He's definitely very experienced and he's done a superb job. So I'm really happy to support this.
Yes, Darryl. Just one observation. Having had John Hill as the police area returning officer on 2 occasions, I found him to be very professional and the team around him as well. So certainly would have my endorsement.
And Councillor Bowden. Thank you, Mayor. I'm pleased to hear that John Hill knew about this proposal to appoint him before we discussed it, because it can be a little bit like pass the parcel. Being returning officer is not just an easy job. It's got some real responsibilities, and if you get it wrong, and occasionally for big elections, returning officers do sometimes get it wrong, the consequences can be really substantial indeed, including for that returning officer. And just in recent years, the chief executives who acted as returning officers of Wandsworth and of Newcastle under Lyme both lost their jobs, had to resign very shortly after with all due respect, making a mess of their elections in different ways. So I'm pleased that this is being given to someone with experience, knowledge, and a proven track record.
Yeah, I'd absolutely endorse what Darryl said, but I would want to add these are not the only elections happening in May next year, and I would ask that the returning officer for the mayorals also is liaising closely with all the returning officers across the area who are going to be dealing with the county council elections as well, because it can be very difficult for everyone involved if there are 2 separate timetables running through and people aren't talking. And what it can end up with is people getting 4 hours sleep in the middle of the night because you're staying late and then you're coming back early. And I think that has been an experience in the past. So if we can ensure that these are all coordinated, I think that's really important, particularly for the staff that have to be up early or staying late.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for such supportive comments. I'm getting a feeling that we're all in agreement here, but I'm just going to ask Rob, as our CEO, who I know made sure that this was an appointment that could happen. So
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things. I think Councillor Bones touched on why I was happy that John wanted to take this on and didn't ask me to do it, as that could be an option. And I have been a paro and a returning officer many times, so I was pleased that John was happy. Just to give reassurance, this has been discussed across all of the returning officers, so they are all aware, they're all supportive, and importantly, then that leads into Councillor Smith's point around the coordination that need to happen around the county elections happening at the same time. It won't be for me to tell John how he wants to do that part of it, but he will obviously be counting ballot boxes, or his team will be, for the county elections himself in the Ely wards at the same time, or East Cambs wards, as well as everybody else. But he has asked that I'm around certainly on the counting day near him, which I will be, and as support, because what Councillor Bowden says is right. I think returning officers should look like swans, and hopefully your experience is that is exactly what they look like on the day. I can assure you that their legs are very much like that of a swan in a very fast stream. So
reassuring to know that such preparations are already happening. Important for next year. I think it's time to move to the vote. Those in favour?
Just say we can ask them to move in seconds.
Yes. I've done it. Did I not do it? Oh, and on this one. All right. Well, I'll move it, and I'll take a second from. So I will move it, and Councillor Bailey will second, to move to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And those abstaining? Thank you. And on that, I think I'm going to be the first to offer my hearty congratulations to a very good returning officer who I have met before in that role. Okay, thank you. The review of investment concept papers. We've kind of referenced this before, Lucy's comment, but this is the item which is to be presented by Jace. And Scott, as our Executive Director for Resources, will introduce the report. And to you, Janice.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Board. And this is the first time that concept papers as part of the new single assurance framework for the Combined Authority have actually come to Board. So, as mentioned, this is part of the single assurance framework. The concept papers are developed in respect of projects that are new to the programme, whether that's revenue investment or capital investment. In the case of these two concept papers, these are early stage thinking about that, but obviously the detail enough to work through about if there are any issues before moving into or approving to move into full business case development, which is needed for the detail of this. There are two concept proposals within this paper. The first one is for the Cambridge and Peterborough Impact, which is for 996,000 in revenue, and the second for the delivery of the digital connectivity strategy for 25 to 29, which totals £7 million over the period, of which 2.25 million is in year one. The most significant issue about both of these two concepts is they are not within the medium-term financial plan, and therefore there is a further discussion. This is what fits into Councillor Netzinger's point here around about how these can be fed into the financial plan if they are approved ultimately for investment. This stage, the approval requested from Board is they be taken forward to be developed into a more formal business plan, which will consider that funding as part of that. But in considering funding, we do recognise the overcommitment within the programme, and therefore we do need to think about how we will prioritise these things as well going forward. So that's just really a heads up on those two concept papers. They're here for discussion. These two papers were discussed by the Investment Committee at their meeting on the 29th of August, and the timing was a little bit tight, which we're trying to improve going forward around this. So a addendum was issued Friday on this about the feedback from the Investment Committee. So just to confirm that for those of you, just to ensure that you've been able to see this, that for the Cambridge and Peterborough Impact, the comments from the Investment Committee, I'm sure members of the Investment Committee here will correct me if they feel that further information is needed on these as well, is that they were supportive of the concept. Consideration to be given to the performance indicators that were proposed within the concept papers, and to perhaps look beyond the particular numbers and consider other ways to measure effectiveness and impact on the organisations and on the residents within the areas. The continuing collaboration with constituent councils and their economic development teams was important in development of the proposal. The consideration should also be given to the wider aspects that linked with the work of social enterprises and their suppliers and other local voluntary and community sector organisations, as well as the Market Towns Initiative. And finally, on this particular item, about the practical delivery as well of the proposals, and whether there could be any support opportunity to involve umbrella organisations that are also skilled and got the contacts within the sector as well to support on that. The second concept paper is for the delivery of digital connectivity. Again, members of the Investment Committee were supportive of the concept. And for this, it was stated it was important that it fitted into the broader regional strategy and incorporated feedback from the stakeholders that are involved. And it was seen as a continuation of the success of the Connecting Cambridge initiative as well, that's taken place over the last 4 years. And the ongoing engagement with the Business Board was also highlighted as a crucial factor in the proposal's development, with particular focus on the long-term plan and the alignment with the broader digital connectivity goals as well for the region, including the inclusion element of that as well for the region. So whilst I brought the paper because it's talking about investment, I have to say we do have subject matter experts here that will be able to discuss either of those papers. So Judith is here to support on the digital connectivity, and in terms of the social impact fund, Domenico is also invited up if he's able to respond in relation to any specific queries or aspect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Janice. So I will be moving the recommendations from the chair because I will also be in this. Do I have a seconder? Yes, I'll take it from Councillor Wakeford, who is also the deputy chair of that committee. So thank you, Sam. And I'll just, before I open up to debate, I have to just reiterate, I mean, we did actually put something out on the social media and in terms of our website. This is one of the best committees I have ever been to in my 3 and a bit years, in terms of it was new, it felt vibrant, it felt incredibly inclusive, it felt that there was feeding from the officers, and it felt about ambitious, and it felt there was a sense of real possibility. Teething problems, yes, because of how it sits, as you kind of alluded to, as to, you know, the bigger picture that then fits into the medium-term financial plan. But I am so delighted to see these coming, and there's a sort of an aspect of how we've been on that improvement journey and how we can develop things in cooperation with our constituent members, and really feel that the combined authority can deliver in some really innovative stuff, which was highlighted within that committee. So I've said too much, I'm a chair, so I'm opening the report to debate. So vote, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed. I will be supporting this, but I did have a couple of points I'd like to raise with the hope that you, Mayor, and officers will give this consideration as the process develops. First of all, on the third sector generally, I think it's quite often underestimated just how large the third sector is, both in terms of the number of people employed and the part of the percentage of the economy that the third sector constitutes. And I think all of us in our relevant authorities are very well aware of the value of third sector organisations. So for that reason, I'm very happy to support this. But I was unhappy when looking at the numbers behind this. Now, I know the comment was made that it shouldn't all be about numbers, and historically, it's been well recognised that there is an enormous amount of intangible value given by the third sector, which is exceptionally difficult to quantify financially. So I'll put that to one side, but to the extent that we have put numbers in, I was surprised to see that the jobs, the 60 jobs which have been mentioned, have been monetised based on the median weekly earnings in the east of England. And it's well known, and even the Living Wage Foundation produced a briefing note fairly recently about low pay in the third sector, that average pay in the third sector is, or median pay in the third sector rather, is significantly lower than there is in the rest of the economy generally. So I do think that when we look at this again, and when officers look at this again, they shouldn't necessarily just use as an assumption that the jobs are monetarised at the median level in the east of England, but should take into account the fact that the median of third sector jobs, the median level of earnings is lower than the overall median. My second point, Mayor, is an opportunity for you. Now, we're in a political system where people can often think that things are very cynical. But believe it or not, I believe you, Mayor, when you say that you want to reduce geographical inequalities within the area. I believe you. The trouble is that what you say and what you believe doesn't always get translated into what actually happens. And you've got an opportunity to do something here, and I'll explain what it is. One of the purposes of this, it's quite high up in the paper, is to achieve good growth. But when you look at geographical inequality and addressing that, you've got to go to the top of page 6 to find in the report to find anything at all about that. And then it's only the few words that Fenland and East Cambs will have equal numbers of organisations supported. And that's all that's said. Now, the difficulty here is that if everyone is treated equally, then the inequality, I'm going to stop now because I know from experience that I'll be outgunned by the training. Good. If we do know from experience that if we do have, as we do, significant inequalities, if you have equal growth across the piece, then you actually increase the amount of inequality. Let me give you an example on that, a numerical example with made-up numbers. And Sam, if you don't mind, I'll use South Cambs, given that that's the richest local authority, richest area in our area.
I'm sure he's interested.
Oh, sorry, not Sam. It's John.
But we are all interested.
So let's take that. If South Cambs, for example, has a GVA, let's say, of 200, and Fenland has a GVA of 100, then you've got a disparity there of 100. Just making numbers up. If you have a 1% increase in GVA, then South Cambs goes to 202, Fenland goes to 101, so the disparity increases from 100 to 101. So the point I'm making, and I know that the numbers I made are just nonsense, but especially given that 1%, given that the paper we've got here is 2 orders of magnitude smaller than that in terms of its impact. But the point I'm making, Mayor, is that if you wish, as I know you do, if you wish to reduce inequality, you have to put a disproportionate amount of the resource that we've got into those areas which are more deprived in order to reduce the inequality which exists. And that's not what is happening here. So the opportunity I'm giving you here, Mayor, is to say something now, but also to work behind the scenes after this meeting with officers to try to ensure that those areas which have the greatest need are the ones which actually receive a somewhat disproportionate amount of the support which is given here in order to reduce that geographical inequality which you yourself very honestly, I believe, say that you want to achieve. There are a few words I recall, if I may be so bold and almost be political. I do record the 6 words, to each according to his need. Well, my apologies, I didn't mean to make you laugh. But assuming that is still something which is believed by people in the Labour Party, then please, would you, when you have an opportunity in a scheme such as this to reduce inequality, you have the power, Mayor, to achieve that. And so it gives you the opportunity to put your beliefs into practice, and that's what I'd ask you to consider.
Well, I think I will take a little bit of the challenge, although you said it was simple. I hope that doesn't mean I'm simple, because but I think when we talked about inequalities, and the thing that drove me on a personal level to come in was the health inequalities. You'll be well aware of the work of Professor Sir Michael Marmot, and I would absolutely love to work with you, particularly as a representative for public health, but of the whole of the board, and indeed something that the Labour Party wants to do, to work towards a Marmot nation, and actually designation as a Marmot combined authority. So I guess my challenge back in dealing with some of the inequality and some of the major challenges that I have seen over the course of my career, where health inequalities have been down to inequalities around education, employment, opportunity. Let's work together on that.
Thank you for giving the challenge to me, and it is a bit disingenuous, if you pardon my saying so, Mayor, even to change the subject from what we've got in front of us to health inequalities. Although I will point out that on health inequalities, the Marmot report was never adopted by any government. But putting that to one side, in terms of what we've got here in front of us, that's both the challenge and the opportunity which I give to you, and I'd ask you to consider.
And we can broaden out the debate, but health inequalities inevitably, as you know, are not just related to how good their local GP is or their local hospital is, the quality of the consultation. It's about poverty, it's about access to education, it's about employment, which I would argue is very much part of the role of the Combined Authority Board. Interestingly, you would have made a very good representative for the Fenland District Council, because this did come up. Obviously, I appreciate you're a very busy man, but the issue about some of the figures, I saw Al, who was there, he wanted her to come in very quickly because this was actually highlighted as some of the concerns as we've been learning about presenting this paper.
Thank you, Matt. I'll try and be condensed. Very valid point in terms of data. It was something that was discussed, and I'm really appreciative that it already was reflected and came back and the addendums in terms of recognising that actually the metrics we were using weren't helpful. In fact, they created more challenge than opportunity, and there are different ways we can measure. One of the opening conversations as a new investment committee was, in terms of reference, was defining measures of success. And on some projects, we are talking about GVA, and some we're talking about jobs, and others we're talking about sustainability and social impact, and we can't use the same measures for each, nor should we. So I think that was something I think was really, really collegiate and was reflected back. On your specific point in terms of support for social enterprise across the region, given this is a concept paper, I have to say, whilst the spirit I agree with, the application or the suggestion I don't. There's an inference that if we have a finite pot of money and we want to grow social enterprise, we can split it depending on need. And economically, that is absolutely, from my point of view, daft. We have to, first of all, identify where there's opportunity for social enterprise that is sustainable and an investment will have a long-term impact. Once you know and you've identified where those opportunities are, and they may be equally spread, there may be areas where there are none, we can then look at the process for awarding that funding based on criteria of which one variable may be, this is an area of greater need or deprivation. But the problem often with the projects is not to start by ring fencing, saying we will put 50% in this region, because there may not be sustainable opportunities, and then that would be a really poor use of public money.
Other people now want to come in, Chris, but okay.
Thank you, Mayor. I 100% agree with the comments just made by Al, and that's exactly what I was saying at the beginning of this meeting. It's much easier if you want to achieve the best gross improvement across the whole area to concentrate on those areas where you get the quickest, easiest response and result. And that is the exact problem that we've got with economic growth as a whole. It's much easier in the south than in the north to achieve economic growth. And that's the point. I think I'll make my point exactly clearly. Absolutely, you need to make a conscious decision not to go for the maximum overall growth in order to achieve a reduction of inequality. It's that disparity I talked about earlier, that dichotomy I talked about earlier. And so I fully accept the comments that was made by Al, which I think were completely appropriate and accurate.
If I may, and I appreciate climate and the most salient point is if we change our measure on some projects when it comes to social impact, long-term sustainability and community cohesion and other values, then that automatically changes us from simply measuring those opportunities that are purely weighted on GVA change. And that levels the playing field in the concept that you've defined. So but this is a concept paper and it would be way too early right now to be setting the measures until we've identified the goals.
And on that point, it's obviously a very good job that we have changed over the course of the years the way we measure our outcomes. From originally arriving here 3 and a bit years ago, there was only 3 measures. There are so many more that we bring into the consideration when we are working together as a board. Thank you. We're on. I think so. We're getting there. We're getting there. Lucy, Councillor Nistinger.
Thank you. I think we're going to spend more time discussing this particular KPI for a concept paper than lots of other things today. But I think that that there are some interesting things to discuss about the KPI that Chris has raised here. One of which is that actually many social enterprises and charities and other organisations don't just work in one of the districts, they work across a number of districts. To take one example, there's a charity that I know that is completely wonderful that's based in Wisbech, but half its work goes on in Girton. Do you classify all of that as being Fenland based, or is it half Fenland and half South Cambs? I think this KPI probably needs a little bit more analysis and subtlety. I do think that there is probably something that could be included in the contract around it being particularly helpful to support some of these organisations in areas of economic deprivation. And we have areas of economic deprivation in all of our districts. So they're not all in one place. But I do think it would be quite helpful to think of that as something that we particularly want to support. So if you've got 2 kind of equal, it's very unlikely you will ever have 2 entirely equal people bidding to, but actually if you did and one of them was based in the Oxmoor and one of them was based in Newnham, the Oxmoor should get it. So.
Thank you, Lucy. Sam, you did indicate an interest.
Thank you. as Janice, as Al, and as Lucy have touched upon, we did discuss metrics carefully at the investment committee last week and challenged some of the specificity in here, and these are indicative anyway. But I think, provided we are taking that discussion on board, which I take it we very much are, and is implicit in the recommendation I've seconded from the Mayor to take these forwards, bearing in mind the discussion we had at Investment Committee and today, I don't see anything here that precludes us picking up the points Councillor Bowden's describing. I mean, at the risk of getting back into school maths lessons, of course, there's a sort of basic definitional question of what we're looking at when we're trying to measure inequality, saying Chris Bowden's example with 100 and 200 units both being increased by %. Yes, when they've both been increased by %, there may be 101 units difference between them, but the second one is still 100% bigger than the first one. So it depends what we mean when we're talking about relative and absolute numbers. But I think the basic point he makes is well understood by those of us looking at these things, which absolutely across the Mayor's party, which I'm part of, but I think from comments here and in other combined authority committees, frankly, across the chamber, are extremely concerned about tackling and the fact that Councillor Bowden brings challenges of inequality in his district, which are equally present in some of the more rural elements of other districts, including ours, not confined to the rural areas as well. I think he's enormously welcome. So I thank him for bringing up the topic, and I hope he's been reassured by the discussions. If I may just on a specific and technical point, which I've realised didn't occur to me at Investment Committee last week, but I think we have used in this discussion, and I think the paper uses reference to third sector in different ways, and we did touch on a bit last week the extent to which some of the partners proposed for involvement are focused in the charitable space rather than necessarily the social enterprise space as well. And I think we all understand what we're talking about here, that we're talking about charities as well as non-charities that are social enterprises in various respects, potentially community groups as well. And I'm sure we can make sure that we're sort of tighter as we develop proposals and look at procurement and so on. But I'm certainly aware some of the organisation assisted have, as I say, expertise in sort of subsets of that group as well, which is why we made the comment about engaging with other umbrella organisations too.
Thank you. I think it's interesting because in the same way that as we were learning last week about how that we presented this process, there is, in a way, that this paper has really just come to say, look, do we agree with the process? Is this roughly in the right ballpark? But obviously, in our very rich discussion, we've veered off into other sort of concepts and ended up talking about the Marmot nation of the future, maybe. So I would propose now is that in that case, order is a point of order, yeah.
Thank you. I'm afraid what I said had been misinterpreted, and I was talking about the absolute inequalities that there are within the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough region, and this is exemplified by the fact not that there are inequalities in every district, because of course there are, but of the local super output areas in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the 32 most deprived are all in Fenland or in Peterborough. And when you put it as starkly as that, you can see why there is this geographical problem which needs to be addressed. The new statistics will be coming out in the next 6 months sometime, and I fear that that number of 32 will increase when those statistics come out. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for raising that point of order. Anna, did you really want to move on, but I appreciate you might.
Yeah, sorry, I was so busy jotting down what I wanted to say that I didn't actually put my hand up, so I do appreciate the chance to get in. The historian and kind of political scientist in me can't help point out to Councillor Bowden that the Labour Party is not actually a Marxist party, although I am delighted to hear him quoting Marx, and maybe he is considering crossing the floor at some point soon. I think Al is absolutely correct about the importance of it is going to be about the opportunities for investment here as well as the amounts. I read that Councillor Bowden has
had some experience with the Fenland Investment Committee at the moment in terms of finding the right things to invest in. So he will obviously be aware that there aren't always the opportunities out there. I had a couple of quite granular questions. I do apologise. So one of which is in terms of the investment fund. There's a reference to not duplicating efforts, which of course is really important. It's just to point out that quite a lot of the funding at the moment that's going to the ALIA project from Cambridge is from the SPF. Now, clearly the SPF funding doesn't continue. So if we're basing future funding on a pot that isn't continuing, I think we need to consider how we factor that in and not just assume that the SPF is rolling on when we know it isn't. In terms of how we allocate, I'm very happy to kind of sing the praises hugely because I worked with them closely when I was focusing on inequality in Cambridge, to recommend the grants team from Cambridge City Council in terms of how they approach this. Colleagues will be aware there's a £1 million grant pot in Cambridge for reducing inequality and addressing deprivation. And they've had to think very carefully about how to allocate funds because it's always oversubscribed. So very happy to talk about that and in terms of really thinking about those clear criteria, and it links to something that Councillor Nessinger was saying about looking at where the projects are actually active as well as where the group is based. And I think that's a really important and powerful thing to do. There was a comment earlier about that lower pay in the third sector, and I absolutely acknowledge that. I am slightly concerned if we start factoring in that low pay that we're almost endorsing it. And I absolutely appreciate the third sector is hugely underfunded and that's why it gets forced through to low wages. But my sense is that we should continue to talk about a median pay rather than a median pay for the third sector from that point of view. The other question I had was, could we confirm that these reports, and I'm obviously thinking partly with my chair of TIC hat on here, that these reports are still going to go, or a version of them, to the relevant committees. So we're talking here, for example, about connectivity strategies that clearly will be going through transport and infrastructure. So I just want to confirm that we will have the opportunity to discuss that in TIC as well.
Okay, answer a few questions there. Yeah, please.
If I could just respond in terms of the clarity around the digital connectivity strategy, I can confirm that is going to TIC on the 18th of September, so it's on the agenda, so we'll have that opportunity to speak then. And effectively what's happening is we're talking about the funding in parallel to the strategy development. This is only at the concept stage, so the strategy will be discussed and I would hope approved, perhaps with amendments, ahead of the business case being revised and coming back through this process. So we're parallel tracking, and as you will have seen from the papers, we're anxious to make sure that we're giving Connecting Cambridgeshire the opportunity to build on their previous success and make sure that we're making provision for year one through this process, so we don't have a cliff edge of them not being able to continue because we weren't taking it through our decision-making processes. So that's the kind of issue there. So I can confirm that will be going through TIC. And certainly in terms of the other comments that we've heard that Domenico and I have discussed as we've been going through, again, because this is a concept and we will be bringing it into the business case stage, we've been making notes and we can take all of these issues through and make sure they're reflected in the considerations going into the business case.
Thank you. I'm aware that we have somebody who will need to leave at 12 o'clock, so that's, again, a very rich discussion, discussed many aspects of it, and it's one of those things. I think there's a process here that we're still learning from, but it's always helpful to have the input the board. I've moved my recommendations yet? Yes, we've done that. So we'll move to the vote. Those in favour of accepting this report? Those in favour? Unanimous. So that's a unanimous vote. On that note, Al, you need to go. We've got two more to go. I don't know if anybody's... Keep going. Right, okay. So these are the, obviously, recommendations from the Skills and Employment Committee, item 16. They were debated in detail and approved by subject experts on the committee at the meeting on the 29th of July. And does anyone have any particular questions or comments on the report within this agenda item, or are we all happy to take these recommendations straight to a vote? Okay, Lucy, Councillor Nasinger, as chair of the Skills and Employment Committee, are you happy to propose the recommendations as set in the summary report? And I will do the seconding. So in that case, we can move to the vote. Okay, for those that are here, that's unanimous now. So thank you for that. And then item 17, recommendation from Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee. They've been debated in detail and approved by subject experts on the committee at the meeting on the 31st of July. Any questions, comments on the reports within this agenda, or we're all happy to take these recommendations straight to a vote? Okay, thank you. Right, okay. I will be moving the recommendations from the chair, so I'll need a seconder, but we can still have a discussion. Okay, I'll take that from Councillor Singer. Anna, Councillor Bailey.
So I've got comments on the 100k homes and then the second set.
100k homes first.
Okay. Well, just to say, obviously, East Cambs is pleased to be taking over responsibility if we go with the recommendation to take over the responsibility for the running of the 100k homes. And I just wanted to report happily that, in fact, we've been doing that over the summer because the first home at Fordham, the first purchaser actually sold their property that they'd purchased for 100k. East Cambs oversaw that process, and I'm happy to say they haven't been trapped in their 100k home as was feared, and they've moved on up the housing ladder. So it's been a very successful process, and I think we should be thanking East Cambs District Council for taking this on, because actually the Combined Authority hasn't got any appropriate resource left in its organisation to do so. So we're pleased to be taking it over.
And do you want to comment about the other? I don't. Does anybody else want to make any comments about the 100k home? No. Lucy?
Are you able to tell us how much it sold for?
Well, I'm not. I don't know if Councillor Bailey, if it's in the public domain. That's
a matter of public record. I mean, it was 117k.
Okay. Okay. No more comments. Do you want the climate programme, Anna?
Yeah, thank you. So I've just got a question on the care homes retrofit funding. There's a suggestion in the recommendations from the committee to redeploy the funding elsewhere on the General Climate Action Programme. No suggestions as to where that might be, so I guess it's just going to get absorbed by the programme and, I don't know, redeployed somewhere else. But the budget was 2 million, I seem to remember, on this plan. And it seems we're planning in the end to spend 100k of that 2 million on the care homes retrofit funding. So I was just keen to understand where the 100,000 have been spent and why we haven't managed to spend the rest.
I'm sure Bridget.
And then I've got something on net zero.
Okay. Do you want to give the officer answer to that, Dennis?
Yes, thank you. That's correct. The care homes retrofit programme, you're correct, is a £2 million. There have been 2 projects that have been funded. I haven't got those figures at the top of my head, but it's broadly, one of them was just under 100,000 and the other one was about half that. So I think the spend was nearer about 150,000, but I can come back to you on the specifics of that. Yes, you're correct. We have been reporting that position to Environment Sustainable Communities Committee, and there has been a request to look at lessons learned from that process. Obviously, it was identified as an area that would make a significant difference in terms of reducing running costs for care homes, but in fact, the take-up wasn't what was expected, despite some work by a number of our local authorities, including, I know Peterborough spent a lot of time working with care homes to see if they could boost the interest. The informal feedback, rather than a formal lessons learned exercise, was that it was incredibly difficult for those care homes that had the greatest problems to find the match funding, and that actually the kind of structure of it needs some looking at. In order to perhaps find a way that it would be helpful to move forward. So I think that lessons learned piece of work is actually really important to think a look at, you know, how it has it worked better elsewhere? What were the particular barriers? Why did people take it up? So I think that's something that the committee have asked for, and I think we need to move forward on. In terms of your sort of second point, which then relates to what are we doing with the money? So the money from that will go into the climate programme, because obviously it was part of the decarbonisation. So it will be within the climate programme. So in terms of then how is that overseen and how is that directed, that will be directed in line with, so the Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee will be overseeing, and indeed they've got a workshop next week and then a committee on the 25th of October to continue to kind of set the strategic direction of that. And any of the projects that come forward, in the same way as we just saw in the last item, those projects will come through the investment panel and the investment committee, and then to board as either concepts or business case. So there will be the opportunity. So it won't be disappearing absolutely without your oversight. It will all form part of those processes. So just sort of recapping, in March, I think it was, at the Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee, they kind of set the broad strategic framework, and then the money will go into that. So I can't. When we have the next update, you will be able to see where all of the money went, but the overview is in the paper on the 31st of July.
Thank you very much. And just on Net Zero Villages funding, so I seem to recall that this was first suggested, you know, it followed on from the Market Towns programme, and that it was first suggested, I think we started talking about it in December 2021, and we allocated it in the 21-22 budget. It had to be carried forward into 22-23 and then again into 23-24, and in fact this paper is suggesting allowing spend to continue into 25-26, which would mean that it's taken some 5 years to send what are really small amounts of money. I mean 163,000 for East Cambs district, for example. My massive concern at the moment is that, you know, villages don't necessarily have, you know, oven ready, set to go net zero projects lined up, ready to go, and they don't necessarily have, you know, some will, but they don't necessarily have the expertise, you know, to put these projects together. So it's going to require significant support and resources, which obviously the CPCA has not been able to do for some significant period of time. I'm really happy to support the allocation of this fund to each local authority, as the committee is asking us to do, but what I'm very concerned about is the sort of lack of detailed terms from the combined authority as to how we're supposed to be spending this money. So I think it's really critical that we get urgent sort of terms and conditions for the allocation, so that we can get cracking on with it, because it's going to be challenging to get this money spent, you know, as quickly as possible. And also I just, so if we could have something back on, that would be great. And also, while on the subject, I noted that there was a formula for allocating this funding, and in line with the discussion that's dominated today, I've got to question why, given that the formula is attempting to recognise rural deprivation. Fenland's only being allocated £93,000 compared with South Cambs at £402,000. Seems rather stark to me, even given population differences. But it's, you know, it's for helping rural villages, so it's a strange formula that's produced that result.
I think there's two questions there, James. We could go that one.
Thank you. So on the first one, regarding the net zero villages, the amount of money and the flexibility, and clearly it's not desirable, as you say, that the delays have happened, and we've been working very hard within Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee to address that and bring this spend forward. And that committee decided that the best way to advance this would be through allocating the money to our constituent local authorities who are closer to those villages and parish councils, and that would be desirable. That decision was taken on the 31st of July to bring it here. So in parallel to that, the grant funding agreements are being developed, and we should be in a position, if they didn't go out in draft last night, they certainly should be going out today, because I was discussing it only yesterday afternoon. So those terms and conditions are being developed. It is, so in terms of sort of reassuring local authority colleagues about about how that will be done, at the committee we were clear that we need to offer flexibility. We appreciating the point that it would be desirable to get all of that money spent as quickly as possible. There was also a discussion about needing to make sure it's spent on the right things rather than doing it quickly. So that's why we've got the flexibility to allow the spend into 25-26, because if it isn't possible for the work to be done with parish councils and villages in this financial year, when, as you say, we've only got kind of 6 months left, basically, but it could be done to finish, let's say, next July, we would much rather have a 9-month period or a year period rather than just enforcing that all of the money has to be spent in the one financial year. So that the committee discussed and felt that the flexibility was key. So the way the money will be released to local authorities will be a standard funding agreement with a commitment to pay 50% up front and then 50% at the end of this financial year, subject to the progress that you identify at this point, that that local authorities are in line with, hopefully, spending to the end of the programme that they've identified. We're aiming to be really flexible so that you can work with your parish councils on the projects that you're aware of, but also to focus on that decarbonisation, because the Net Zero Villages was very much set up about decarbonising rural communities. And so if there's a series of, that might take different forms. That might be working with schools, that might be working with village halls, that might be working on solar, that might be working in various different ways. And we're effectively saying, please look at the amount of money that we've allocated, and please use it in the way with your communities that you can. We recognise there's challenges in terms of capacity, and that's why we've had a conversation about allowing you to top slice some of that money to give you the capacity to actually have some of those conversations to make that happen.
Just while we're on that subject, if it's okay, sorry to butt in. So when you say making sure that the projects are being spent on the right projects, you said the right projects. Is there some sort of suggestion that projects have got to come back here, or is that being left in?
No, so what we would, yes. So what we're expecting in terms of a monitoring is, you might say to us, right, we've gone through a process, we intend to fund X, Y, and Z, and then hopefully in March you'll be able to say X and Y are going well, Z's taking a bit longer, and we could release the money on that basis. So that's the approach that we're taking. Just finally, on the allocation model, we did have a lot of discussion over how to do the allocation. The end result, which was taken through a number of meetings of place directors, my equivalent across our constituent authorities, was that it would be a combination of using the Rural Prosperity Fund model that DEFRA had, as you can see from the paper, and also population. And so that was the compromise. It isn't, nothing's ideal. All of the other models, had various pros and cons, but that was the compromise that was put forward to the committee. Clearly, we can look at other methods going forward. I think one of the considerations is this is about decarbonisation. If there are other models, given the conversations we've had around this table this morning, that we want to look at in the future, very happy to see this as a pilot year. Let's make sure we learn the lessons, understand, and then perhaps look at a different allocation model going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Didn't ask to speak, Mayor, but the reason I didn't ask to speak was, I think what I would say would be very predictable. And also, around this table, I have very, very little power indeed. What I was looking at you at, Mayor, was to see if you would speak, because despite all the evidence, I still believe that you believe in reducing geographical inequalities. And I can't believe that, given that belief, that you are happy with this outcome. But I was hoping you would say something about that.
I've got nothing more to add. I'm the chair, and I'm listening, and I'm taking in all the different arguments.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is, as you also said, this is about decarbonisation, and therefore it's not regarding the highest levels of CO2 emissions actually happen in the south of the area, because that's where the economic activity is highest. So actually applying something according to, economic activity, where you should be giving the majority of the money to places where the economic activity isn't happening, is not actually going to solve the carbon emissions, is it? So you should be focusing on those areas which are generating the carbon emissions to get those carbon emissions down. And that's the point of carbon reduction.
I think we all know that the vast majority of CO2 emissions come from our peatlands. Well, there's no more peatlands than in bits of East Cambridgeshire and the Fens.
I think we've already given yourself, Judith, a few things to come back with. There are some very fair and valid points that have been raised on both sides of a very challenging target of reducing carbon in the environment, of course, which is what the air we breathe. Doesn't matter where you live, you need to kind of reduce the amount of CO2. So over to you, Judith. Not to say anything more, but just really, you've been given a challenge. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I don't have all of the facts and figures available in terms of where all of the carbon emissions come from across the area, but obviously we know there are a number of different drivers around agriculture, about the economy, around transport and around domestic. This programme is looking very much at supporting villages at what they can do in their communities to bring forward proposals, and actually not only bring forward proposals but actually test them and see the impact. And one of the things that I think will be really important is to bring the findings of those experiences together at the committee in the future, so that we can actually see the impact that was made and evaluate and understand. So that will be critical. But absolutely, the learning from how we allocate money, how we look at different systems of allocating money is absolutely something we need to continue to look at. And I absolutely will take that away.
Those that we move now to a vote. Again, it was proposed and seconded already. Those in favour? Those. Oh, that's unanimous. Yeah, nice. That's always nice to finish on a positive of unanimity. We are now at the close of the meeting. So thank you all for your input during the course of the last 2 and a bit hours. Thank you for coming to the wonderful Fenland area for the hospitality. And I'm going to close the meeting now. Thank you.